If you watched last week's programme on the Ocean Race Europe, you'll have seen that I spoke to someone who knows the IMOCA fleet well, Marcus Hutchinson. Over the last 20 years, he's raced aboard and managed several IMOCA teams, and his insight into where this class is and where it's going was fascinating. From the comments we received, last week's chat was very popular, but there was loads more that we simply didn't have time to run in the feature. Among the topics we didn't have time for included how you can reconfigure an IMOCA for inshore or offshore sailing, what this race teaches us and the teams and how they're climbing the learning curve, as well as considering some of the differences between the boats and their budgets. And of course, plenty more. So if you'd like to know more about these and other topics, here's a fuller version of my one-to-one with Marcus Hutchinson. Marcus, good to see you. First of all, before we get into the Ocean Race Europe, just give us a quick overview of what your involvement with the IMOCA fleet has been, because you've been involved with the fleet for a while, haven't you?
Yeah, I got involved in 2014. Well, I sailed back in the early 2000s with Mike Golding, helped him prepare his first Vendée Globe, and then I did the Jacques Vabre with him. But that was when you used to sit outside and hold a tiller and things like that when it was windy. So, but no, fantastic class and a fantastic environment. Obviously, at that stage, it was still a pretty fringe environment in terms of global sailing program, the solo sailors and what have you. Why would you want to do that? But over the years, obviously the class has developed a lot. It's become a lot more mainstream. They become interesting, very, very interesting technical boats, and probably now represent a class of boat that really has the entire Grand Prix ocean racing. I use the word ocean, not offshore, ocean racing scene stitched up. And so I've been involved really since that's 25 years now. But more recently, I ran Paul Mayer's first IMOCA program, which was SMA from 14 to 18, and then Thomas Rion's project, which was the first Advents, which became linked out for the Vendée Globe before last, and then have run a few other projects at the same time in between. Last Vendée Globe I was involved with Oliver here with his project. But it's a fascinating environment. They're technically very interesting boats, but they're big organizations as well. And because the class has got such a wide-ranging program of races with the three disciplines of sailing represented, solo, two-handed, and fully crewed now, it's become very interesting. It's not a French-only thing by any stretch of the imagination. And the Ocean Race World, the Ocean Race Europe, the Ocean Race Atlantic means that 3 years out of every 4 years in the 4-year sort of Vendée Globe cycle, there is fully crewed racing at a very high level. And very little of that is in France. Obviously, the French cycle of Route de Rome and Jacques Vabre, they still exist. And so the class has grown accordingly, and there's a lot of more international teams getting involved to get involved in this thing, because it's the only ocean racing Grand Prix class.
Yeah. Well, having managed Paul Mayer in the SMA days, you're perfectly placed for my main question, which is, why has Biotherm been so quick? I mean, they've scored, certainly up until coming out of Nice, they hit every single one, got maximum points. They hit every point that they could.
It's like always in yacht racing. It's those that make the least mistakes that do the damage. Clearly, Paul he's had that boat for 3 years now, and surely when he started the ocean race with it, it was just 3 months old and it wasn't sorted out. They're extremely complicated boats, and so it's taken him really this length of time. Build up to the last Vendée Globe, and all the shenanigans that went with that, changing foils and things, and making the boat reliable to get to a stage where he has 100% confidence in his boat. But I would say most significantly for Paul, this is the only real target event he had for this year. He's done a couple of other things like the Gotland Ruin, but his goal for 2025 was to win this race. And this race is not a Vendée Globe. You're not loading it up with spares and backup systems and this and that and the other. So aiming towards this, he very much geared it up to be available for, I'm not going to say the light air sailing, but the varied sailing that is this event. And so it's probably the lightest boat at the moment. And then if you look at the other boats, well, what's his name? Bakari Alagrande Mapai. That boat has just been transferred from the previous owner to this owner, or Thomas and Morgan are sailing on it, but Ambrogio is still getting his head around it, and so learning how it is. And the boat also did the the British Isles race, the Cap, Caustic Cap, earlier in the year, which was a big thing. They had a problem with their mast, and so they've been on the back foot in terms of preparation. They didn't do the first leg, so they're playing catch up. The biggest surprise to me, I think, is Paprec Arkea, why they haven't been so quick. But again, their goals are the Jacques Vabre this winter, and so they're very much in oceanic mode. I think there's also a certain amount of fatigue amongst some of the sailors. I would also put a lot of emphasis on the profile of the crew that Paul has had on Biotherm, a fantastic group of really, really talented sailors, many of which we know, obviously, in the English-speaking world. Sam, shout out for Sam Goodchild, who's done all of the legs. Jack Boutel was on the boat as well. I remember Paul telling me wasn't in Nice, it was in Cartagena during the stopover. He looked at me and he said, it's fantastic, those two guys. It's like one person with 8 arms. They don't talk much to each other, but they're just everywhere and everything. And it all just happens automatically. And it's just a joy to sail with them. And then Amelie Grassi, a fantastic young female sailor who did the last ocean race with Paul on board the same boat. So she knows that boat well. She's had a huge amount of varied experience. She sailed the Fastnet race on SVR Les Artigues. So these are the people that know each other well, are at the top of their game. And I would say also, obviously, they sailed the first leg very well, took the points, and that gave them a little boost and confidence that they'd made the right decisions. And they've sailed very, very smartly since. In terms of on the water stuff, this is coastal racing in the summer, and then when we get to the Med, obviously it's a bit more complicated. If you watch their tracks, you're able to see that he's always positioned himself on the right side of the group. But every time he's not leading, it's because he's moved to one side where he thinks the next wind is going to come from, and he's been right so far. So I say that team has been right. They've sailed really, really well, and I think everyone is recognizant of that. Holcim PRB. Clearly, they had their accident in the first leg. They've got average points since, and they've been very competitive. And when I watch the two of them racing, I'm on watch quite often with the race management team through the nights and stuff. And so you've got your eyes on the screen to see them moving around and making strategic decisions all of the time. Those two boats, the Verdier boats, are probably more competitive in this lighter stuff and the upwind stuff, and dare I say the reaching stuff, whereas the two Coke boats, so Alagrande Mapai and Paprec, are probably more set up for VMG stuff and stronger winds. So it's a combination of things, as it always is in yacht racing. But
it's fascinating to see. I mean, you've actually answered this question already, but it's fascinating to see that actually we're quite used to in races saying, well, someone's run away with it, the rest of it. But Biotherm hasn't run away with it, have they? They've come back. The number, I was counting it up. Yeah. Out of all the legs, as of when they left Nice, 4 out of the 5 legs, they had to get back into the lead at some point. They're overtaken. And it's remarkable how they've managed to do it. But that's that is what you've been saying.
They're smart. They're sailing smart. They've got a little bit of an edge from time to time in boat speed, but I love the analogy with the other class that we're all very involved with, which is the Figaro class, because it's very close racing. Right now there's 4 of them within, we say 4 miles doesn't sound like much, but the speeds those boats go, that's basically 4 boats beside each other in the big scheme of things. And they've had nip and tuck 2 or 3 boats all the way around, and it doesn't take very much. And it's not just a drag race around Europe. This is there's good tactical racing going on, and the strategic stuff in the Mediterranean of where to be with the wind. I mean, they're all complaining as always. The wind, we don't know what's going on and all the rest of it. It's not unusual I suppose, to see that Ambrogio has done better in this leg. I mean, he's obviously gaining confidence with the boat because he's now on his 4th leg of the race. but he's in front of where he learned to sail and the part of sailing that he's doing, even though his boat might not be the most competitive in that. People are making mistakes all the time, or the race restarts because they come out of 20 knots of wind and hit a Mediterranean wall of zero wind and sit there for a little bit. But that's the key times when you've got to be on this side or that side of the group to exploit what comes next first by knowing which side it's got to be.
Yeah, it's the old adage, isn't it? The harder I train, the luckier I get. Now, one thing I just quickly want to touch on that you mentioned earlier on, you were talking about the configuration of the boats and what Biotherm had done in lightening it up, and then you were talking about Paprick Archaea being set up more with a focus for offshore. Does it really, it shows up that much with these boats, does it? You can
Well,
reconfigure them and then they just behave quite differently.
yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into too much of that because I don't want to show my ignorance in this. But there is a certain amount of variety. You can make the boats. The IMOCA class is pretty. How should I say? It's pretty simple. The rule is pretty simple. There's obviously a 60 foot length limit, but the whole thing is based on stability, and stability obviously is a function of the weight of the boat and a function of the vertical center of gravity, and those things can be adjusted, obviously. And so, how do you adjust the weight? Well, other than obviously taking everything off, you can remove some weight from the bulb. You can move the bulb up and down the keel a few centimeters to make sure that if the boat gets heavier or lighter, that it doesn't exceed its maximum draft. Um, but and then you can get rid of some water ballast volume in the tanks. But I can't speak on their behalf of exactly what they've done, but we know that they work very hard to put it into a more of an inshore lighter airs or lighter configuration that is basically allowing them to accelerate earlier. And the bottom line is that with these boats, when they're on their foils, if you're in displacement mode and your boat takes off in 1 knot less wind or half a knot less wind than the boat that's beside you, well, suddenly, if you're doing 5 or 6 knots faster than the other boat whilst the wind's filling in for the other boat, well, then that's suddenly 5 miles that you've got on the guy, and that's what this is about. It's a the game is exactly the same in terms of the differences and what have you, but the speeds are so incredible that a small difference means you're foil borne more quickly.
Indeed. I mean, are you just another thing that's just it sort of occurred to me really watching these boats is that I've been amazed at Paprick Archaea and the way that they fly the boat. They look so stable for a class of boat that doesn't have a T4, and that in itself is a topic that we won't go into right now. But I got the sense talking to Johan and some of the others that the teams are learning very quickly at the moment about new ways of flying these boats. And I just wonder whether this race with, 4 crew on board, so the ability to try out more things because you've got a full crew, and short bursts where you can reconfigure things, is that accelerating the learning process in the class as a whole, do you think?
There's no question that when you're lined up racing against other boats in daylight in an environment where you've got a lot of competent people on board the boat, you learn much more quickly because you can try things quickly, but more important, you can discuss it amongst the group of people that are on board as to whether this is making the difference or whatever. Whereas clearly, when you're sailing even two-handed or solo, well, you've only got yourself, and big races, you're always out of sight of the boats, and so you can't really tell. There's one caveat to that I would say. You're looking at pictures of Paprec in the Round Europe race foiling around. The Round Europe race for the most part has been a relatively flat water, if not a completely flat water event, and so boats like Paprec and Alla Grande Mapai are really configured to win the Vendée Globe, which basically means being super fast in downwind VMG stuff in the Southern Ocean, which means that they're configured with a different bow configuration. They have a lot more rocker and things like that, and a foil configuration that is a lot more rocker in the bow and a fuller bow and all the rest of it. So they're the more recent generation. But your question earlier about whether this is can you configure your boats differently for different races? Well, there's a little bit of it, but we have to be aware that as we go further forwards, that there is a difference between a solo boat designed brand new today to win the Vendée Globe and a boat to win the ocean race. For starters, the Vendée Globe, there are 2 convergence points on the course. One's called Cape Horn and the other's called the finish line. Everywhere else, you're free to go where you want, and you choose to chase down the weather to suit the conditions that your boat likes or what is the most viable. Clearly, with the ocean race, if there's 8 or 9 ports, or 7 or 8 ports, and so 7 or 8, 9 legs. Well, there's by definition 9 convergence points because there's 9 finish lines instead of one. And obviously, there's an awful lot more headlands involved. And so the kind of sailing is very different. For example, there's an awful lot more hand steering in this race, a significantly amount more. And because, not only because there's more people on board, but because you need to be that more accurate. The legs last a lot less time. You've got people on board that can rotate through, and so it's a different kind of sailing. And I'd argue that, I'd like to think that the Ocean Race Europe and next year's the Ocean Race Atlantic, which is New York to Barcelona in September, and even some of the legs around the world, not necessarily the deep south, but some of the shorter legs in the North Atlantic or the Mediterranean stuff, should be more attractive to sailors that perhaps want to come and try this environment. Owners should probably try and get into this and do a bit more, because it's pretty exciting sailing. It's very, very tight. And the offshore component at a high level, we have lost, I say offshore. We had the Admiral's Cup obviously this year, and the Fastnet and the Channel race, but that's the first time we've seen any real Grand Prix quality for a very long time. And even then, they're only 600-mile legs. So I hope that with the publicity that race, the Ocean Race Europe, gets, and the accessibility of what is the IMOCA class and the international classes that are there. There's an Italian team, there's a German team, there's a Canadian team now with Scott Shaver. Obviously there's always French teams and what have you, but this is an environment to get into. And the training, the Formula 2 version of it is there with the offshore stuff in one design, with the Figaro class, two-handed, fully crewed and single-handed. So it's a nice environment that not an awful lot of people know about. And I think the Ocean Race Europe is, this is a second edition, but the first edition we ran it during COVID, so it was pretty complicated. There were no villages, there was very little activation because it was just complicated. But as a technical exercise, it proved that it could be done, and here we are 4 years later, proving not only it can be done, but it's a great show.
You can indeed proving it can be done. But the next question is, why are the teams doing it though? Because it's not a cheap thing to do, is it? We're talking, even for a team that's set up and established, it's probably going to be somewhere between 100 and 200,000 euros to do this. So it's a fair bit of, they're not doing this just for fun.
Well, I mean, we're at the professional end of yacht racing. Why do you do the America's Cup? Why do you do a lot of these events? The return on investment is significantly greater than what it costs to do. But these are not just one-hit wonders. These boats live on a 4-year cycle, even longer in many cases. Teams exist for 4 or 6 or 8 years, some even longer than that. Right across the board, be it in the L team scene or class 40s, or again, I mentioned the Figaro class, but definitely the IMOCA is the one that's most visible. These are a viable professional team environments that are, for sure, we sometimes hear big numbers bandied about, and like always in life, you can spend as much as you want. But you can also do these things at a fraction of what people say. And I would argue, in fact, it's probably interesting. I'm not going to get into the numbers because I don't know them, but I know that Paul Meilhat, his team Biotherm, is probably running on the smallest of all of the budgets here, except perhaps Meilhat, who came very last minute to this project, but their performance obviously is limited due to the boat and due to the amount of time that the team and the profile of the team in getting going. They have another objective, but and going forwards, there's plenty of time to look at this seriously and say, why don't we do the New York Barcelona? Or why don't we look seriously at sharing a boat with a team to do some of the ocean race or something like that? It's not inaccessible. For sure, it's a commitment. It costs money, but I would argue it costs a lot less than perhaps what some of these TP52 programs are running, and certainly what some of the mini maxi programs are running. So it's just another area that perhaps has existed well in France for a while, hasn't been particularly well publicized beyond that, and I think the Ocean Race Europe is and what goes forwards is doing a good job with that.